Welcome again to Continued Story Reading. I'm your host, Keith Borgelt. We're reading the story of David Gates, Mission Pilot. David remembered the joy he felt as he saw his lovely wife step out of that plane. That night they spread their sheets on the sand. Sleeping accommodations consisted of a plastic tarp over their sleeping bags. Since it hadn't rained for 3 months, they had no worries. But during the night the weather changed and rain woke them up. In moments the gentle drops turned into a drenching tropical rain. Becky wandered up one of the blankets and huddled over it for hours. At least it stayed dry. The guys kept dumping the water from the plastic tarp, but soon they were all soaked. Finally, the rain stopped, and all 4 of them huddled under the one dry sleeping bag. What a miserable night. The next day, Friday, the girls washed the wet, sand-covered sheets and blankets in the river and spread them out to dry. A farmer named Emerson and his helpers came by in his long canoe. He stopped to talk. "Do you think the river will rise any higher?" David asked. "Nah, you don't need to worry. It's probably all it'll rise," he replied. Tim and David talked about where they should sleep that night. "We'll construct a nice little shelter off the sand in the grass. That way we can be sure we'll get a good night's sleep and enjoy a happy Sabbath tomorrow. It's easy to get balsa wood in the jungle. We can use the plastic tarps for a slanting roof." The finished shelter pleased them all. "Let it rain. It doesn't matter any more," David said. "We can stay dry in our cozy shelter at the edge of the woods." Extremely tired from lack of sleep the night before, they went to bed early that Friday night. The clear sky seemed to assure them of no more rain. But about 2 a.m. they awoke with a floating sensation. David reached out his hand and plunged it into several inches of water. "Oh, no! River must be rising fast. Heavy rain must have fallen upriver in the mountains." In the darkness they grabbed all their stuff and waded toward the hill, stumbling and falling over tree roots. But the river kept following them. It rose 25 feet that night. They hung what they could in the trees and returned for more trips to get their food, their generator, and other equipment that would float down the river if not retrieved quickly. Another miserable night. The next morning, after a skimpy breakfast of the little food that wasn't soaked, they decided to enjoy Sabbath school together in the woods. Later, Emerson, who had assured them of no rain, came by on the river with a boatload of men, and he saw their little house floating in the water, but no sign of people. "Oh, no," he thought. "What happened to the gringos? I told them the river wouldn't rise, and it did." Emerson beached his boat, and the men began looking for the missing missionaries. When they heard singing, they followed the sound and found them. With a big smile, he suggested, "Please let me take you to my house. All your clothes, bedding, and food are wet." "We'd rather not move this equipment on the Sabbath, because that's our day of rest. We never do work on the Sabbath. We'd prefer to come tomorrow if we can. I think we can manage here." "I understand you are Seventh-day Adventists and can't work on the Sabbath." Turning to his men, he ordered, "Pick up their stuff and load the canoe." Almost immediately 11 men had picked up all of their baggage and equipment and deposited it in the canoe. David smiled as he said to Becky, "Well, looks like all our men servants are doing the work while we keep Sabbath holy." Emerson took them to his comfortable home built on a far hill above the river. His friendly wife, Lena, welcomed them as she quickly provided a delicious meal and a comfortable place to sleep. Both couples enjoyed the hospitality of this lovely Catholic farmer. This friendship later proved to be a great blessing to David and Becky. They discovered that working among the villagers in that isolated area of Puerto Inca was very rewarding. Medical care led directly to spiritual interests. With medical supplies and food frequently running low, David and Becky saw the need for an airplane to fly into the many small villages to care for the sick. One day David surprised his wife with an idea. "Sweetie pie, let's go to the States and work as nurses at Madison Hospital in Tennessee till we earn enough to buy an airplane. If we make a pact with God to do everything possible not to work on Sabbath, I know He will bless. I do not want to do what I've seen other nurses do, work overtime on Sabbath just to get more money. If we have to care for the sick on God's day, I'll do it willingly. But all that money earned on Sabbath belongs to God. Maybe we could get them to schedule us from Sunday to Thursday whenever possible." With that resolution in their minds, David and Becky moved back to Tennessee and began working in the hospital. God blessed them financially, but they had to pay a price for this resolve. The supervisor scheduled them to work on a different floor almost every week. "We don't allow family members to work together on the same floor. Past experiences prove they don't get along well." One day in an emergency, the staff had no choice but to put the couple together. They found that David and Becky made a harmonious team. After that, Becky felt the thrill of the smiles and sweet words David whispered as they passed each other in the hospital halls. Yes, lovers can continue their romance even at work. After 6 months at the hospital, they had saved enough to buy a Cessna 150 airplane. They had a great time getting the plane ready for the long flight to the mission field. David and a friend flew the small airplane to Peru. Then he returned for Becky. He remembered her saying, "This is just another honeymoon. What fun we have together." When David and Becky returned to Peru with this airplane, Emerson, the kind Catholic farmer who had taken them into his home, gave David and Becky a little house to live in. The close contact generated a precious friendship with this family. Becky and David would eventually name their first baby Lena, after Emerson's kind wife. This industrious, hard-working man inspired them to live their faith as he did. He and his 4 sons gave food and medicine to anyone around them in need, putting into practice the principle Jesus gave in Matthew 25:40. "Whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers, you did for me." Knowing the need for more medical work, Emerson sold a choice piece of land to David and Becky. Later, David sold the property to Becky's parents, who, with their medical skills, developed a thriving clinic. Working there for 7 years, they treated 28,000 patients. This came about because of the kindness of a local farmer who cared. Lying on the cement floor in the dark, David shook his head. He was now a professional pilot of many years' experience, and he marveled at God's loving protection. "We kept the angels busy while we flew that little underpowered 2-seater aircraft all around those jungles in Peru, landing on poor airstrips," he thought. "What joy we had bringing food and medicines to isolated workers, taking patients out for treatment. Very few people know this joy. They fear to venture forth without money." While he was flying over the jungle of Peru one day, God had impressed David that he must learn to do his own airplane maintenance. "Sweetie pie, to be effective, we need to return to the States for more training. When something goes wrong with the plane, I need to know how to fix it. Good mechanics aren't found in the jungle." The couple moved to Kentucky so that David could study aviation maintenance for 2 years. With Becky pregnant and neither of them able to find part-time nursing jobs, they learned that education sometimes requires a high sacrifice. During the first few months, they lived in a small camping trailer in a state park. The second year, both found jobs at the Adventist Hospital in Manchester. 2 daughters, Lena and Katrina, were born there. Shortly before finishing his course of studies, David and a friend were working on an airplane. In his hand, he held a pair of needle-nose pliers, and his partner said, "Pull up with all your might." David pulled hard on the wire, and it slipped. Unable to stop himself, he drove the pliers into his left eye with both hands. He saw a flash of red and fell on his knees. Instantly, he thought his flight career was over. He expected to feel fluid running down his cheek, but no, he felt it, and his cheek was dry. However, he couldn't see anything with that eye. Reaching up fearfully, he pushed his finger on the eye, expecting it would go all the way in. Instead, he felt pressure. "Oh, Lord, I can't believe it. The eye must still be there." He ran into the bathroom and looked into the mirror. Aloud, he exclaimed, "I can see a big hole in my eyelid." The needle-nose pliers bounced off my eye and went on the inside of my eyelid and came out the other side without causing serious damage to the eyeball. David now remembered his prayer of dedication. "Lord, you saved my life as a baby. Now you've saved my eyesight when I'm older. Nothing that I have can ever be considered mine. If you ever allow me to fly on the mission field, if you ever give me opportunities to serve overseas, I dedicate everything I have, my whole life, to you again. If I lose my life, that's your problem. You've already given it back to me so many times. You've returned what I should have lost. What you have restored belongs totally to you." Having completed his missionary preparation as a professional pilot, aviation mechanic, and RN, David grew concerned as he watched denominational aviation programs closing around the world. He realized he needed to diversify his education. "Sweetie pie, the economic and political situation may soon close the church's aviation program in Peru. Computers are coming into prominence. Skilled computer programmers and operators are in high demand. To ensure that I will be needed in the mission field, I need to complete professional training in that area." So, David continued his studies in the United States while he and Becky supported themselves by nursing. He obtained a bachelor's degree with a specialty in computer science. David began work on a Master of Science specializing in software engineering. Through a combination of correspondence courses, distance education, and classroom instruction over 6 years, he would eventually complete the courses of studies and return to the U.S. for graduation. Now that David was much more qualified, officials of the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Secretariat informed him that 3 countries were asking for his services: Brazil, Peru, and Mexico. Which one would be God's choice for him and Becky? Which one had the greatest need? "We need your help, God," they prayed. "Remember your promise. He who calls you is faithful, who will also do it." Friends urged us to consider the advantages of both Brazil and Peru, but we just learned that the 22-bed hospital and nursing school in southern Mexico needs an administrator who could assist the medical and dental students who volunteer each year from Loma Linda. This requires a pilot to fly their airplane to the many villages in the area to bring supplies and to give counsel to these young workers. Are we qualified for such responsibilities? "Another request, God," Becky added. "The South Mexican Union says they now have no budget for an overseas-based deposit and no benefits in the States. We must live on the local salary of only $300 a month. With 2 little girls to care for, is this your plan for us? I have faith in Philippians 4:19. My God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." And so they turned down the more lucrative calls, trusting God to lead and guide them in southern Mexico. Lying on the floor of the prison cell, David recalled many of the challenges and joys God had given them over a year and a half they had served in this needy area. Little Carlos, their adopted Mexican boy, brought them tremendous joy. But if God had led them, why had he allowed the airplane to be hijacked and David to be condemned to prison, perhaps for 14 years? With these troubling questions racing through his mind, David began to remind himself of God's precious promises. "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And, "For nothing is impossible with God." And, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Isaiah 41. That's enough, God. I know I can trust our future in your hands. Thank you for the peace of submitting all to your love and power. With his troubled mind at rest, David slept soundly. In his despair, David had forgotten the special significance of the next day, but God hadn't forgotten. God had chosen to keep the American in prison one more day to give his beloved children a surprise. On that day, the legal advisor gave the district attorney the money for David's release. The DA stuffed it into his pocket. Then, going to the desk, he signed the paper, handed it to the legal director, and said, "We've dropped the charges. Now go pay the bail and get Gates out." Only then did David realize what a small price he had paid: 10 days of medical work for a lifetime of freedom. He rejoiced that he had not yielded to the temptation of depression and had not refused to do his best to help others. Until his release, he had not understood God's method of handing him the keys to the prison. He had served others in ignorance, not knowing that his medical work would unlock the prison doors for him. As the guards led David out of prison, they stopped him to sign out. He walked through the gate and heard it slam shut. At that moment, David remembered hearing the same sound on the day he entered the prison. Suddenly, he realized it was that moment when he had determined to contact the man who had falsely testified against him. During those 10 days, he had completely forgotten to look up the prisoner who had lied about him. Frustrated at himself, he realized he could easily have carried out his resolution. Why hadn't he thought of the man? He even knew the man's name. As David climbed into the legal director's car, he shared his frustration about not contacting his accuser. "I'll be glad that you never did," the legal director said. "The government arranged with him to accuse you. Because he said he had contact with you at the time of the crime, they expected you to make contact with him. They sent spies to follow you the whole time, watching every move you made. Never once did they see you talk to him. You walked by him all the time. You passed by him as you met with hundreds of people, but never once did you look at him, nor did he look at you. If you had looked him up or asked him why he lied, you wouldn't be free today." David's frustration immediately turned to joy. "Praise the Lord!" he exclaimed. He is able not only to bring promises and memory verses into our heads, but he's able to take thoughts out of our minds too. I had no memory of that man from the moment the gates shut to lock me in prison until they opened to let me out. Only then did I think of that man. What marvelous things God does with our mind when we submit it to him. As David rode over the mountains toward home, he could hardly contain his feelings. In his love and gratitude for God, he kept repeating in his mind, "Now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that he works in us." Ephesians chapter 3. Then he thought of his beloved Becky and the joy of seeing her and the children again. 10 days had seemed like 10 years. Perish the horrible thought that he had hounded him every day of every waking moment, 14 years in prison. Now he'd soon be home. He looked at the date on his watch and he remembered something else. 8 years before, on this day, he and Becky had pledged to be true to each other for eternity. His heart skipped a beat. His thoughtful, kind God brought him home on their anniversary. Becky knew nothing about David's release. As she stood looking out the kitchen window while washing dishes, she saw a truck go by. She noted the official seal on the door. Then she saw it back up and stop in front of their house. Instantly she stiffened with fear. Could they be coming here to make more problems? God, give me courage, she prayed as she dried her hands and started to the door. As she opened the front door, she saw a strange man get out of the truck. Wow, he's skinny. Terribly skinny, she thought as she watched him walk slowly up the driveway. He seemed to be going in slow motion, taking small steps. Suddenly, she realized who the man was. Rushing out, she screamed, "David!" He opened his arms, and she fell into them. They clung to each other and cried. Finally, David whispered, "Happy anniversary, sweetie pie." Arm in arm, they walked to the house. The children heard the noise as they entered the living room. "Daddy, Daddy!" they screamed as they ran to him. David knew the joy of being smothered in love, God's love and that of his precious family. Come, kids, let's kneel in a circle and thank Jesus for opening the prison doors and bringing Daddy home. Becky gathered them in her arms. I knew he would. He heard our prayers. Daddy's home. He's home. Katrina and Lena chorused over and over. Then they bowed their heads and helped little Carlos fold his hands as David poured out his thanks to their Father in heaven. Becky and David talked a long while that night after they had tucked the children into bed. Sweetie pie, I learned so much in prison. I'm a changed man. I finally realized that I own nothing in this world. Everything belongs to God. In that prison cell, I had no home, no family, no car, no plane, no books to enjoy, no computer. I had nothing but God and the peace he gave when I trusted everything to him. He alone gave me freedom. He opened the prison doors and allowed me to come back to my precious family. Because of his compassionate love, now I can use all the things he provides that make our life convenient. I owe my life, my health, my breath, everything to him. He has all of me and everything I have forever. And Becky added her praise. As I struggled with depression and fear, I also learned a new trust in him. When my faith wavered, I called on him and peace came. What precious lessons of total commitment God gave us those 10 days. I'm so glad we can depend on him, for he not only hears and answers prayer, but gives us courage when everything seems bleak and hopeless. The situation in southern Mexico remained tense. Leaders at the South Mexican Union, the Seventh-day Adventist Administrative Headquarters, pressed the government to give back the airplane. The military realized that they might lose this valuable airplane, for they had received a court order from the Mexican government to return the airplane. Since they had no intention of complying, they planned another scheme. They decided to have David, an innocent man, thrown back in jail. In order to do this, they managed to get an entire village to sign a paper saying that they had seen David using the airplane for illegal purposes, even though he'd never landed at that village. Then they sent out a warrant for his arrest. A church administrator stopped by the local police headquarters to pick up a legal document, and the desk officer said, "We have a warrant to arrest your Capitan. We know he's innocent and suggest you get him out of here fast, for we don't want to see him at all. If we do, we must arrest him again, and this time they won't let him leave prison." Immediately, the conference officials advised David, "Capitan Gates, get ready to leave as fast as possible. Pack your belongings, but stay in your home. Tell no one your plans. As soon as you can leave, contact us and we'll arrange for you and your family to leave the country. We suggest you leave at night so that your departure will not be known. Later, after you have gone, we'll ship your belongings to you." With mixed feelings of gratitude and sadness, the Gates family left the country they had come to love. They trusted the promise, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Joshua 1:9. In faith, they committed God's work in southern Mexico to other hands whom God would choose. Eagerly, they waited to see where God planned to send them next to serve him. After a short rest visiting with their parents in the United States, David and Becky received a call from the Inca Union of Seventh-day Adventists to return to Peru. "We need someone to be director of computer services throughout the Union. Please come and work with us in Lima." For David, this assignment meant traveling almost continually. Urgent calls for his expert computer knowledge came without let-up. He'd be 1 month away from home, 1 month at the office, then another month out, then back again at the office. This demanding rat race of service took precious time from his family and communion with God. Did God have more lessons to teach David about faith and trust? Was David totally depending on him and valuing a closer relationship with him? Had he learned to release his whole life to God? While driving in Lima one day, David pulled his car from a side road into heavy traffic, 5 lanes bumper to bumper. He glanced to his left and saw a pistol aimed at his head. He gasped as he looked down the barrel of the gun about 1 foot away. He expected a shot, and that would be his last moment. He put on the brakes, and so did the cars behind him. The man with the pistol moved on. Later, he found out that he had crossed paths with a gang of bank robbers trying to get away. As they wound through the traffic, one man kept his pistol aimed at other drivers. Every car either slowed down or stopped, and the robbers got away and disappeared in the traffic. David felt God's presence and thanked him for his angel. Another afternoon, when David was in downtown Lima, he received a message. "A shipment of computers has come into the port of Callao. Please pick them up." He had driven his old station wagon to the city, even though the starter wasn't working. In Lima, it can be difficult to get a new automobile part. The way to fix the problem was to get it rebuilt. He'd taken it into an electrician who would rewind the starter. That would take time, and since he had no other vehicle, he had to drive with no starter, relying on others to push him to get the engine going. Knowing the long distance back to the university and the closeness of the port of Callao, he decided to take a chance. Surely someone would help him get started after he had the computers loaded. He had no trouble getting to the port. As quickly as he could, he filled out the paperwork, cleared customs, loaded the station wagon with $70,000 worth of computers. These much-needed machines would be distributed throughout the mission, the university, other schools, and the hospitals. He wondered how many people had sacrificed to give the money for these much-needed computers. While loading them, he couldn't help but hear the language of the kids around him, foul, obscene, unfit for children or adults. Worried thoughts filled his mind. If kids talk like this, what are the morals of the adults? Callao has always been a rough area, and this section of town gets worse as I head up the road toward the university. To get the heavily loaded car started, he found 3 men to push. As he drove out onto the street, he reminded God, "You promised that the angel of the Lord encamps all around those who fear him and delivers them." He added aloud, "Thanks, God, that I'm in a car and moving through this slum area." Moments later, he looked down at the dash as red lights flashed, signaling that the engine had become extremely hot. Then the engine sputtered and froze. He pulled off the street, parked on the gravel. Looking around, he discovered that he had parked uphill by an old abandoned bus with no wheels. Probably had been sitting there for 20 years, a hangout for local drug addicts. He looked at his watch. 10 minutes to 6, and almost sundown. He quickly took off his tie and suit coat, saying aloud, "God, I'd rather be anywhere else in the world than here. Stay with me." He rushed into a nearby store. The storekeeper looked at him as though he was crazy, wondering what a man like him was doing on the streets at dusk. Could you please give me some water for my car?" The man found a bucket and filled it. David poured it into the radiator. He returned with another bucket and poured again, but the radiator wasn't filling up. He looked underneath and saw that the water pouring out through a hole in the freeze plug. Then he knew he was in deep trouble. He had no way to put water in the car, he didn't have a starter, and all the stores in Lima closed promptly at 6. While he stood there pondering what to do, he heard a rattle as the storekeeper shut the gates and locked them for the night. He scanned the street, noting that all the shops had closed down. Way down the block, he saw a man disappear around the corner, and he stood there alone. He had only one solution. Please, God, you know I'm in big trouble. I have no way to start this car. There's $70,000 worth of computers to be used in your work. I need your help desperately. Just then, 2 men came out of the bus. David watched them pick up 2 big, jagged rocks. One man walked around the car one way. The other one went to the opposite side. David knew how often assaults took place in Lima. Just a few weeks before, he'd been with a group of friends when several men with a pipe, a chain, and a gun approached them. One threw a rock at him. David saw it in time to dodge as it whizzed behind his head. Now, standing by the station wagon, he knew that if a jagged rock hit him in the temple, it could do tremendous damage. He understood their intentions. They were waiting to see if he would pull out a weapon. As they stepped closer, David thought, Lord, you told us to give our life for our friends, but you said nothing about donated computers. These machines aren't worth my family. I don't have to give my life for computers. Should I leave them? I value your assets, but I choose not to trade my life for this stuff. If you want to protect your equipment, you do it. I can't. He took one step backward and bumped into another man. Where'd he come from? Moments before, he had seen no one but the hoodlums with rocks. David felt the man put his hand on his shoulder. Quickly, David turned around. The man's face startled him. He'd never before seen a face like that. A perfect face, without a flaw. He forgot all about the assault as he stared fascinated at the face that looked at him. Your life is in danger. You have to leave. I know you're right, David exclaimed, but I can't go. My engine is frozen. I don't have a starter. There's no one to push me. I'll push you. Get into your car. You can't push me. The stake wagon's extremely heavy and filled with equipment. It took 3 guys to get me started at the pier. Besides, I'm parked on gravel and it's uphill. There's no way you can do it. I'm afraid those guys will throw rocks at you. David glanced at the 2 men who stood motionless, almost frozen. Strange, he thought. Why aren't they moving? Are they related to Lot's wife? The man spoke again. Get in. I'll push. I know these guys. They're very dangerous. 4 of them live in that old bus. They just finished assaulting a whole busload of people. As soon as they got back, they saw you stranded here and they wanted your equipment. I came to push your car. Puzzled at how much he knew, David agreed. Okay, but it won't start. Fearing for the man's life, David watched him go behind the car. But the 2 men didn't move, just stood holding their rocks. David remembered the standard practice with the pickpockets and thieves in Lima. If anyone intervenes in a robbery and yells, "Watch it, somebody's got your stuff," another person comes up from behind with 3 razor blades taped between their fingers. They slash up the face of the person trying to help, leaving the skin hanging. This horrible thought filled David's mind. Will they slash that perfect, beautiful face? He knew the man couldn't push, but he turned the key. He felt the car move, so he put it in second gear. Still skeptical and pessimistic, David thought, it can't start. The engine's frozen. At that moment, he let out the clutch and the motor purred as if it were running perfectly. He put on the brake. The man yelled, "Get out of here! Hurry up! Please! Please!" David rolled down the window. It's a custom here in Lima to pay for a favor. I can't leave you till I pay you a tip. I don't need your tip, the man said firmly. Go now. Leave, I say. Stubbornly, David insisted. No, I gotta pay you a tip. He ran up and Dave handed him several soles. Please, the man begged, get out of here. Go now. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Continued Story Reading. I'm your host, Keith Borgelt. Bill Bossé at Controls. Join us again next time for more on the story of David Gates, Mission Pilot.